welcome to the first episode of IR TV Now, a brand new series launched by IR Magazine. During this episode, we will hear from a range of panellists and delegates from the ESG Integration Forum Europe and members of the IR team to discuss the latest ESG trends, top stories from February, and how IR professionals are handling the increasing regulation rules. But coming up first, we speak to Noemi De Stefano, reporter at IR Magazine, to discuss the top stories from February. So Noemi, what were the top stories facing IR professionals in February?
Thanks, Emma, for having me on the show. So the first one I would say is our coverage of Warren Buffett's annual letter to shareholders. The news is that in his letter, he says that he endorses buyback programs. Now, just to give you a little bit of context, the letter came out at the same time of his company Berkshire Hathaway Q4 results on 25th of February. And the results show that in Q4 only, the company spent more than $2.5 billion to buy back shares, bringing the total shares buyback for the entire fiscal year 2022 to $8 billion. So, I mean, in this article, there are like a couple of very interesting quotes from Buffett. And also we shed some light on the wider buyback debate, which is particularly lively in the US.
Oh, that does seem like a very interesting story.
Yes, indeed.
So what were other phenomena that took place in February?
So another interesting article from last month is based on the outcome of a conversation that IR Magazine had with ChatGPT. So we asked ChatGPT the impact that it thinks it will have on IROs and on the wider profession. And a couple of interesting answers actually are there. It suggests that it could help gather and analyze market intelligence, competitor information, provide support during earning calls, and so forth. But it also acknowledges that has some limitations. And we ask about those, and we also ask whether IR professionals need training to use it, or how IR teams can leverage AI in their role. So more about this story on our website, of course.
Perfect. Well, that's definitely an interesting read, that one. So one of the biggest themes to affect not just the IR industry, but probably across all industries at the moment, is this ESG phenomenon. I think companies as a whole are taking it more seriously with their climate reports and so forth. So what can you tell us about that in February?
Yeah, so in February there were a couple of ESG developments, a couple of stories that we covered. I'd say probably starting from the first one, we wrote about Osmosis Investment Management, which is a firm that received an allocation of $4.5 billion from a Dutch pension fund. And this was at the time of writing, was one of the largest ever sustainable investment mandates. So what will happen is that under this agreement, the company will run a global equity portfolio, which will focus on resource efficient companies for one of the top 10 largest pension funds in the Netherlands, which is a company called Pension Funds PGP. What is interesting as well is that the company commits to reducing carbon emission, water consumption, and waste generation by more than 50% compared to previous holdings.
Perfect. And just to loop back to the first story you mentioned, which is Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett doing the mass repurchasing of shares.
Yeah.
I know that there were also some other options and some other companies, should I say, that did the same thing, which was that giant energy corporations such as BP and Shell.
Yeah.
Were there any other companies that?
Yeah, there was also the Swiss multinational trading and mining company, Glencore, which saw profits increase this year, and also said that it will launch a $1.5 billion share buyback program. And that is after a successful year in 2022, which saw profit climb more than 60% on 2021.
Wow. Now, another point that we probably should mention is that while the ESG space is growing, so does concerns for more regulation.
Yeah.
What's the latest development on that?
So we had some development on the ISSB front. So that is the International Sustainability Standard Board, which announced during the IFRS Sustainability Symposium in Montreal in mid-February that it will issue its standards in June 2023. So at the moment, I mean, until now, there have been two draft standards under review. Those are exposure draft IFRS S1, which is are about general requirements for disclosure, and the S2, which is about climate related disclosures. So these two standards will be effective from January 2024, which means companies will start collecting data then, and we will see the first reports coming through in 2025.
Well, Naomi, thank you very much.
Thank you, Hannah.
Coming up next, we go live to the ESG Integration Forum Europe, where we will be speaking to a range of panelists and delegates from the event. One of the speakers from the forum is Mark Babington, Executive Director of Regulatory Standards at the Financial Reporting Council. We ask him what the FRC does in terms of assessment and reporting quality, as well as how companies can do better.
So we've issued a number of thematic reports, and all of those are available on our website to download for free. What they show is examples of good practice where companies have demonstrated that they can identify and assure and report the information, particularly using the TCFD framework, as that's the most relevant one in the UK at the moment. But it also identifies where more needs to be done, and in particular, you know, what I said about the importance of the alignment between non-financial information and financial information being a critical part of that jigsaw.
We also ask him about the upcoming SEC climate reporting rules in the US and how this will change the reporting landscape for everyone.
Well, it's the largest and deepest capital market, and, you know, most jurisdictions will find themselves with dual-listed companies that have a dual listing in the US. So therefore, it's a bit like my earlier comment about certain regulation being extraterritorial, and I think this is why jurisdictions are moving so quickly, because if you don't set out what you want, you may find yourself taking rules from another jurisdiction that got there before you.
Speaking of regulations, the International Sustainability Standards Board announced in February that it will issue its first reporting standards at the end of Q2 this year. The standards set a baseline level of disclosures to meet the market's needs. However, they are not compulsory. We asked Yana Yochakova, Managing Director and Head of ESG International at Morosa Dali, if they should be.
From my personal perspective, I don't think so. And maybe, this is a controversial. It should be compulsory from almost, at the basic level. So what I mean by the basic level is, and I think it actually already is, because generally the regulatory requirements are that you have to disclose what's material, right? And you have to basically talk about the financial impact. So from the general perspective, when you look at most of the jurisdictions and the requirements for companies in terms of the reporting, they do have, continuous disclosure obligations. They do basically have obligations to really disclose material information and really inform the market, right? So from that perspective, it's already there, but it's the way how it's interpreted potentially, and how we actually understand ESG, which some of the panels were trying to also explore, as to what is actually considered material, and are companies potentially greenwashing as well, right? We haven't really agreed on that. So should that be regulated? I don't necessarily think so. I think we'll figure it out and sort of more organically. And again, I do I'm a stronger believer in, again, the power of stakeholders on individual companies rather than blank regulatory requirements.
With so many regulations on the table, Benoit Rabault, ESG Investor Relations Officer at Total Energies, speaks about the other top challenges facing the IR community this year in regards to the ESG space.
First and foremost, regulation. It's getting more and more complicated for us to be aware of everything going on there, and so it requires a lot of work and efforts. And we're a big company, so we have the means for that. But honestly, I share the pain for smaller companies. Second, I would say it's data management. Data management is a challenge. There are so many reporting standards, and the regulation when it comes to climate reporting, reporting on Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 emission, methane in our case, and so on, there is no harmonization of standards at the moment. So managing the data, disseminating the data, and very efficiently communicating the data to investors which have different expectations is clearly a challenge for us. And I'd say a third challenge I could mention there is clearly activism as well. If you go back a few years ago, there were less questions about ESG. Now, because of the evolution of the regulation and the CSRD, we have the Article 8, Article 9 funds in Europe, investors have to have ESG engagement policies there. And so therefore, they are increasingly sending us engagement letters, or we can talk about shareholder resolution at AGM and so on. So the amount of questions and engagement and activism that we get from investors is clearly growing.
We speak to Emmanuel Palacucha, Managing Director and Head of Sustainability Advisory at Alliance Advisors, to find out how ESG buy-ins have changed over the years and across different regions.
Historically, there has been greater buy-in for ESG in the UK and across Europe. There's been a better understanding of the way that it serves as a risk management tool, as an opportunity for value creation for companies, and that is something that's more the status quo, more widely accepted, and I'm not sure that's where things are in the US, which is a big reason why we're seeing that backlash there. But here the conversation has evolved well beyond that, and it's more focused on, is ESG at the forefront, or does it take a back seat in the face of geopolitical and macroeconomic challenges with the war in Ukraine and rising energy prices and external factors like that. So I think that's a big difference.
We also ask her if the backlash could become stronger outside the US.
I don't think it's going to increase in other regions. We're seeing large European institutional investors like Legal & General, like Allianz, double down on their commitments and set clear expectations for companies this year, 2024, 2025. And so I think that hopefully it will die down in the US, but luckily things seem to still be moving in a positive direction here in Europe, again, because of the understanding that there's a clear benefit to financial performance and investment objectives when ESG is taken into consideration.
The first episode of IRTV Now has come to an end, but we look forward to welcoming you back to the next one. So until then, thank you and goodbye.